In this demo, I will give you an overview of all major features of Squish Test Center. Test Center started out as a central result storage for all your test results, but over the last 2 years we have added quite a few features to cover more and more testing and quality assurance needs. So what features does Test Center provide and what can it do to help you with your testing? First of all, Test Center provides a central place where you can upload and store all your test results or your COCO coverage results. And of course, at the same time, it then also acts as a hub where everybody can access the results, so you no longer need to worry about the distribution of your test results. When it comes to test result analysis, Test Center offers many features that help you easily find correlations between failures and the configuration tests have run on, that help you easily distinguish between old failures and new failures, and that help you analyze your test results over time to filter out flaky tests or to find tests that slow down your testing. In our last Test Center release, we added support for COCO coverage results as well, so now you can also upload and analyze your coverage data. We try to carry over the most essential features of the COCO coverage browser and also make them available within Test Center. You see the coverage per test, the file and folder coverage, the source code coverage, and you can also analyze the coverage over time so you can see how the code coverage changed after the code was added or changed over time. We also added support for manual testing in Test Center. Test Center provides an easy interface for editing and managing manual tests. You can of course also plan manual test executions and assign them to your testers, and ultimately you can also execute the manual tests from within Test Center. This way you can have your manual test results and your automated test results stored within the same system, and also use all the analysis features we added for automated tests for your manual tests. Test Center integrates quite a few third-party systems like Jira, Zapier, X-Ray, TestRail, Polarion, and Azure DevOps. Test Center can provide traceability with these systems. That means you can easily jump from your test results to the third-party system or the other way around. And that is it for the first short feature overview. The order of features you see here is also roughly the order in which I will now demo these features to you. We start out on the login screen. Test Center is a web application that runs on a server in your company network. The deployment is super simple. You don't need to set up a database. You just specify an SMTP server and a port, and that's about it. Once I logged in, I get to the dashboard. Here I can get a quick overview of the health of all the projects managed in Test Center. And here at the top we can also see some configurable, customizable result views. If you come across some view in Test Center that is especially helpful for you, you can just add it to the dashboard here. Below the result views, we see a customizable list of projects managed in this Test Center instance. For this demo, let's have a look at the product C. It is currently configured to show us the most recently uploaded results, but we can, for example, also configure it to show us the most recent results for each branch. This is especially useful if you develop with a lot of branches in parallel and you want a quick overview of how healthy each branch currently is. We see this list of results here, and each row represents one test run across potentially multiple different configurations. And in Test Center, we call those test runs batches. If you take a look at the branch column here, we see that we have a branch for each version of the software and that the tests for the main branch are currently failing. Now let's get more into the test result analysis aspects of Test Center by clicking on this first failed test run from the nightly test from yesterday, which will bring us to what we call the Explore view. The Explore view is primarily made to find which test cases failed, but also to easily find the correlation between the failed test cases and the configuration the tests have run on. At the top of the Explore view, we find a small pie chart summary, which tells us that from 9 reports, 2 have failed. In this case, each report represents a configuration that the tests have been run on, and from 7 test suites, 2 had at least 1 failure. Below the summary, we see the pivot table, and each of the columns here on the right-hand side represents one configuration the tests have been run on. The configurations are specified using labels, and you can freely decide which labels to use and assign. In this case, I decided to use a label for the operating system, the branch, and the Qt version. So for this first column here, the tests were executed on the Windows platform using a legacy Qt version 4.8 from the main branch of our application. And in the next column, we see that Qt version 5.15 was used. As I said, you can freely choose to label your results whichever way you like. So if you test on physical devices, for example, you might want to add labels for the device type. If you test web applications, you might want to have a label for the browser type and browser version. In this first column here, we see the test suites, and we see that the suite native type and suite address book encountered some failures. Here we can of course also drill down into the test hierarchy and look at the test cases that have failed. So if I click on suite native type, we can see that the test cases which reveal that the unit code test had failed. And we can drill down even further and look at the scenarios and steps. But for now, let's get back to the test suites on the top level. Another thing that we can do here is filter just for the test with failures or new failures using this filter drop-down on the left-hand side. So here I can select with new failures. And this is actually solving a common problem many of our customers face, where there might be a lot of failures, but it's not clear which of these failures are new failures and which of these failures had already occurred in previous test runs. Since Test Center stores not just the current result but also previous results, we can use this information to find out which failures are new failures. And you can also see that information in the older batches column here, which shows that the previous 4 test case results, and we can see that, for example, there was a failure in the suite address book, but it was already a couple of batches ago. Another important feature of the Explore view is finding correlation between the configurations tests have run on and the failures that occurred. For this, we can use the pivoting functionality. For example, I can click on the operating system label here at the top pivot, and then I can already see that the failures that all happened on the Windows platform. And furthermore, I can click on the Qt version label on the left pivot, and that quickly tells me that the issue is limited to the legacy Qt version and Qt version 6.0. Now at any time while browsing the Explore view, I can click on the passing and failing icons here, which will lead me to what we call the verification view. In the verification view, we can see all the details of the test execution. We can see all the log messages, passes, failure, and also attachments or screenshots that were taken during a test run. Here we can see 2 failures that occurred when executing the suite address book on Windows. We can see that there was 1 comparison that failed, and that there is some text that didn't match the expected result. And we can see another failure, which is the visual verification from a squish test that failed. What we can also see is that these failures here come with stack traces, and these denote where exactly in our test scripts the error occurred. And since Test Center also integrates with version control systems, and for this project we have set up a reference to the Git repository where our tests are stored, we can now click on the stack trace here, which leads us to the source code view, where we can see exactly which verification in the test script unveiled the problem in our tests or AOT. And we can use this information to either fix our test scripts or write a bug report. Getting back to the verification view and this visual verification point here, for visual, screenshot, and table verifications from squish tests, we offer additional details. You can just click the camera icon here, and that will open the verification point dialog. Here we can see the actual state of the AOT at the time the verification was performed. And since this is a visual verification point, it also stores information about the UI controls. So if we click on this table cell here, we get a list of all the properties and the values of the properties at the time the verification was performed. Now this is the actual, but of course there also needs to be a reference of expected values. We can use this switch here at the bottom to switch between actual and expected. On the expected view, we see the state the application was supposed to be in during the verification, and it also gives us a list of all the differences between the actual and expected. And we can either cycle through the differences, or we can click on specific UI elements and check if there are any differences in the properties. So for example, in this table cell, the text was supposed to be hey, but the actual was haze. There's also this handle here that you can drag across the image to visually compare the actual and expected and find differences. So in this case, we see there is a difference in which elements were selected during the testing, and we also see the textual difference. There are quite a few Squish customers who make heavy use of screenshot and visual verification points, so they usually have lots of reference images for all the screens they have in their AOT, and for each test run they go through all the differences that have been discovered during testing and either approve the differences or file bug reports for differences that are not acceptable. When changes are approved, you of course also want to update the reference image so that the issue does not pop up again in the next test runs. In the past, this used to be potentially quite cumbersome, so we decided to specifically target this workflow and make it possible to approve changes right from within Test Center. For this, we added this little button up down here, which is labeled Update Expected VP. And what it does is that it allows to create a commit in the linked repository. As I said earlier, this project is linked to a Git repository, and you can now document in the commit message what the change in the UI was and why you approve it. The change will get committed once I press submit. The repository will then be updated with this new state. This way I can easily browse all the differences in Test Center and approve them one by one without having to ever leave Test Center. Going back to the verification view, there is one last result type that I want to show you, and for this I will quickly jump to a different result. Since version 7 of Squish, Squish supports recording videos during testing, and these videos can also be viewed in Test Center. When a video recording is available for the time an event occurred, like in this failure here, we can see a video icon next to the failure, and clicking on this icon will open up the video dialog. Depending on which event you clicked, the video will jump to the correct point in time at which the event occurred, and you can play back the video to see what exactly happened when the failure occurred. That can save you a lot of time in figuring out what had happened when the test run encountered the error. And to help you navigate the video, we also added this custom timeline here at the bottom. This timeline always synchronizes with the video, and you can see all the events that happen during the test execution. You can zoom into the timeline to see more details, and you can click on any event to make the video jump to the corresponding location. So for example, I can click on this failure here, and the video is played back at the time the failure occurred. So this is a great tool to help you debug issues that happened during your testing. Okay, now that we have looked at the details of a test execution, it is time to analyze test results over time. For this, let's first get back to the page where we started out exploring the first result. And then from the navigation bar at the top here, we can select History. One of the features that the history offers is the timeline. Each of the items you see in this timeline represents a test run across multiple configurations, or batch as we call it in Test Center. So if you look at these two failures here at the bottom, this was the batch that we previously looked at in the Explore view. We can use this view to find out if the tests have failed before and if we are maybe dealing with unknown issues. So if we look at Sweet Native Type, we can drill down to see the test cases, and then we see that for the Unicode test we already see failures a couple of days ago. Now, to find out if these were actually the same failure, we can use the compare feature to compare these two results. For this, we can click this compare button up here, and that will allow us to select two batches. And now we can jump to the compare page to figure out if these two batches failed for the same reason. So now I still have to select the Windows result, and then on the right hand side we had the result that we were looking at in the Explore view, and on the left hand side we had the result that failed a couple of days earlier. So, and on this first level we see that we have the same feature that failed, and we can now drill down to see that also the same scenario failed and the same step failed. And on the lowest level, on the event level, we can see that also the events and failures are identical. In this case, the tests were executed using the screenshot on failure option, so we could even compare screenshots to see if this is actually the same issue. So in this case, we can conclude that this error has indeed happened before. Okay, now that we have taken a look at the compare feature, let's get back to the history view and take a look at the test statistics. And let's maybe also take a look at a bigger time frame. And now we can switch from the timeline view to the stats view by using the menu above the timelines. And on the stats page, we find the success rate, for example, which we can use to figure out which tests fail most often. Or we can take a look at the flakiness, which allows us to figure out which tests are unstable and unreliable and should be improved. Flakiness is measured by looking at how often a test changes its state from passed to failed or the other way around. So in this case, Sweet Native Type had the most state changes and is likely the most unreliable. Another thing you might be interested in is the time it takes to execute your test. Usually you want your tests to take as little time as possible so that you can establish a fast feedback loop for your developers. So in that case, you would be looking at the column of the average duration to find out which tests have the most improvement potential. Which brings us to another important view, which is the graph view. In the graph view, we can also look at the duration, but in this case, we also see how the duration has developed over time. So when you add new tests or adjust your tests, you can use this to check if the test duration is still in a reasonable range. There are many options to configure the graph. For example, I can look at the total value, but I can also configure it to show the individual values that make up the total value. Furthermore, I can also look at different values side by side. So in this case, I could, for example, add the failures and passes to see how failures and the number of tests executed affect the overall duration. So in this case, we see there is some fluctuation in the number of tests executed, and that also leads to an increase in the duration. But overall, you would use this view to really find out if your duration develops badly over time. Alright, that is about it for the test result analysis. Let's now shortly talk about coverage analysis. For coverage analysis, let's switch to a different project. So I'll go back to the dashboard, and this time around let's pick a test run from a project that has coverage information. Here on the Explore page, we can see that the coverage was only measured on one specific configuration. So there's just one report, but this time around the report does not just have information about the passes and failures, but also shows us the coverage percentage. So at the top here, we see the total coverage across all tests. In this case, this is the line coverage. We can also specify different coverage levels using this menu here on the left. All coverage levels that Squish Coco supports are also available in Test Center. So you can select function coverage, line coverage, statement coverage, decision coverage, condition coverage, MCDC coverage, or multiple condition coverage. So as an example, I could select condition coverage, which now shows me a total coverage of 23.5% for this project here. But of course, we are not just interested in the coverage per test. We also want to know the file coverage and source code coverage. And when we implemented support for coverage, our goal was to support the most important features from Coco's coverage browser. So if you have used coverage browser before, you will find the most important features are also available in Test Center. We can find the file coverage when we switch to the Coco code coverage tab up here. On the code coverage tab, we can browse the file hierarchy, where we can see the coverage for each file and folder. If you want to locate files that are not yet covered well enough, we can simply sort this list and look for the files that are below our threshold. I can also switch to the Functions tab to get a list of all the classes and functions and their respective coverage. I can of course also sort this view as well. And next to the coverage, you can also find the effective lines of code and the McCabe code complexity metric, which you can use to find functions that might benefit from some refactoring. I think now is a good time to move on to the source code coverage. I can click on any of these functions here, and that will open the highlighted source code on the right hand side. The source code is highlighted just like you're used to it from the coverage browser. Lines that are covered are highlighted in green, while lines that are not covered are highlighted in red, and conditions that are only partially covered are highlighted in orange. We can click on all highlighted lines and get some additional information. So if I click on this condition here, for example, the corresponding truth table will be shown, and I can see which conditions are covered and which conditions are not yet covered. So this views should give you all information you need to determine the current coverage state and to find out where you can start improving your coverage. In some ways, Test Center also expands on the feature set of Coco. Just like you can analyze test results over time, you can also use Test Center to analyze how the coverage has changed over time. So for this, again, we can switch to the history view and the graph view. And this time around, we can select different coverage levels. So if I select line coverage here, I can see that the coverage first slightly increased here at the beginning. If we click on the passes here, we can see that the number of tests likely was expanded a little bit, and therefore also our coverage grew a little bit. At the end of the graph, we see that the coverage decreased, which likely indicates that new potentially untested code was added. In this case, we can verify this by also displaying the effective lines of code, so that now we see the lines of code on the pink bars and the line coverage on the green bars. And we can see indeed that there was a slight increase in the effective lines of code here, and at the same time a decrease in the line coverage. This concludes what I wanted to show you for the coverage analysis in Test Center. Next up, let's have a look at our manual testing support. We can find the manual testing section in the top menu bar, and once we have entered it, we also need to switch to a project that actually contains manual tests. As you can see, this section is subdivided into 3 subsections that are represented by tabs. So in this first tab here, we have the test management, which is all about creating, editing, and maintaining manual tests. The second tab is called execution configuration, which is all about organizing a test cycle by creating and assigning manual test executions to your testers. And in the third tab, which is called execution overview, you can see the status and progress of your currently active test cycles. And of course, there's also a dedicated view for testers to execute manual tests. I will get to that later. And now I will show you each of the sections in a little bit more detail, and we will start out with the manual test management. We try to make it as easy and seamless as possible to create new manual tests or to edit existing tests. So there are no forms you need to confirm and no page transition. Adding manual tests should be a very fluid process. We can create new test suites using this button up here, and we can decide whether it's supposed to be a BDD style test suite with features and scenarios, or whether we want to create a more basic test suite that just has test cases in it. For this demo though, I already prepared some small example test case that would otherwise be difficult to automate. So the assumption here is that we want to test that our application can be uninstalled using the operating system's application management. Up here on the left, we see the test suite that I created, the installer tests, and we see the first test case called verify the application can be uninstalled using the operating system's app management. And if we select it, then the test case opens up here on the left-hand side, where we can see the test case's description and the test steps underneath. I can very easily edit these test steps. So all I need to do, let's say, if I want to highlight the first word here, I can just click into the test case and use Markdown to highlight this word. And as you can see, it gets stored immediately. So editing tests is a very fluid process. As I already said, for formatting we rely on Markdown, and as you can see down here, that also allows us to embed reference images and so on. Now let's say we want to add another test case, and maybe this test case should just verify if our application can even be installed and launched. And yeah, I can very easily add a new test case by using this plus button up here. And then I just can enter the name of the test case. So in this case, we'll call it verify the application can be installed and launched. For this test case, we can leverage the fact that test cases oftentimes share the same initialization steps and prerequisites. And since we already created a related test case, we can just reuse some of the steps that we created before. So instead of adding another step, I can add an existing step using this button up here. And then I can just select the existing steps I want to reuse. And now we see the two shared steps that have been added. And for this test case, that is actually already all that we need. So we are already done creating our test case. Now that we have created our manual tests, we want to, of course, also schedule them for execution. And to do that, let's move on to the execution configuration. In this view, you can find the exact same hierarchy of tests, just that this time it's read-only, and yeah, you can select individual test cases. So let's just go ahead and create two executions, one for each of these test cases. So I need to specify a name for the test cycle. Let's call it cycle 1. And I can pick an assignee. So for the first one, let's assign myself. And I can also add a label. Since this is a Windows specific test, let's add the Windows label. And yeah, so let's select the first test. And once I press the execution, create execution, the user that we assigned will be notified that there's a new manual test that he should be working on. And yeah, let's create another test maybe that is not yet assigned for the other test case that we created. In general, you can add as many test cases to a single execution as you like. It's just for this demo that I decided to create individual executions for each test case. And yeah, now that we have scheduled our manual tests, we can go and check what the current status of the test cycle is. For that, we go to the execution overview. Yeah, if I'm just a tester, I can filter this test overview to just those items that are actually assigned to me. And if I'm a test manager, then I can filter it so that I see all the executions. Yeah, I can also see the current status of each execution. So whether it passed or failed. In this case, it does not yet have a status. I can also see that on the completion percentage, which is at 0%, and which otherwise roughly tells me how many steps are still left open to do. On the overview, I can also do assignment or reassignment of executions. So for this execution that I previously left unassigned, I can now also assign it to me. And then we can move on to the actual execution of manual tests. So on the right-hand side here, we can see this play button, which we can use to jump to the execution. And yeah, let's just do that now. This is the execution view. This is where your testers can execute manual tests. And in the top left corner here, we see the test cycle or batch that the execution belongs to. And we can see other information like the configuration that was chosen for this test. So here we can see that the operating system Windows should be used. Then on the right hand side we simply get the test case description and a list of all the steps that the tester should follow. The important difference compared to previous views is that now we have this action bar underneath the active test steps. And here we can specify whether or not we could successfully execute this step or whether the execution failed. So let's say we start executing this, and let's just say maybe this first step passed and maybe the second step also passed. But then we get to the actual verification and maybe there's some problem here and we cannot execute it properly. So let's say this failed. Once it failed, I can of course enter a message and say why it failed. So there's some reason why I could not execute this. And maybe we also want to create a Jira ticket for this. So on the right hand side we have this action menu, and one of the options here is to create a Jira issue. So this will open a Jira dialog, and here I can, let me just quickly fill it out. Let's say this is a bug and I'm the reporter of that bug, and some issue occurred. Now once I submit this issue, it gets created on the Jira instance. And we see that there's also, it also gets added to the steps, so we can always see that there was some issue. And I can also follow this link to the Jira instance where my issue got created. I will talk a little bit more about the Jira integration and other integrations in a second. But now that we have created the Jira ticket, let's just skip the rest of the test and finish it. Now that we have finished the execution, we can either jump directly to the Explore view, or in this case, let's go back to the overview for a short moment, just so you can see how finished test cases are represented in the overview. For this, I also need to actually show completed tests, but now we see this little checkered flag here, which indicates, okay, this manual test has been completed, and there was a failure during the execution. On the very right hand side, we see this Explore View button, and if you click on it, that will lead us back to the Explore View. And on the Explore view, we could now just analyze the manual test results, just like I showed you earlier for the automated test results. And this is really one of the advantages of doing manual testing in Test Center, that you will get access to all your test results, no matter whether they are automated tests or manual tests. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you for manual testing. And now let's talk a little bit about traceability and integrations. So if I go to the global settings here, we can see all the integrations that I talked about earlier that we provide. And let's specifically look at the Jira integration, because we also already used that earlier. Here we can see I specified some URL, and we are using OAuth to connect to our Jira instance. And there are 2 projects in our Jira instance, of which I already associated one of them to our manual testing project and to the automated testing project we were looking at earlier. And if we now go back to our manual testing result, we can jump from the Explore view to the traceability view using this button up here. So this button contains all our active integrations, and one of them is Jira. And I can just click on it, and that moves me to the traceability view. And here we actually see the ticket that we created during our manual testing session. And we see on the left-hand side, we see the Jira issues, and on the right-hand side, we see the map Test Center issues. And whenever you create a ticket from within Test Center, then it will also automatically already be mapped here in this traceability view. But this also works the other way around. So I could use this link here on the left side to jump to Jira and now maybe create another issue on our Jira instance, or maybe there's another bug somewhere, and we just create this ticket here. Now, how does Test Center know about this? So we need to go back to our traceability view, and then we can pull, and now we see the ticket that we just created on Jira is now also available in our traceability view. And what we also see is that it is currently not associated. So in this case, we still need to do a manual mapping. So I can just decide, okay, maybe this is related to this test case stored in Test Center, and then I can do the mapping. Okay, in this case, this is skipped, so maybe let's select a different one. All right. Now I can also push this result. So we just saw that I pulled the issue from Jira, but I can also push the test result. So there's this push button up here, and that will now transfer the result over to Jira. Of course, in Jira is not really made for test results. So we just add this little table here to the issue description. And here we can then see, okay, there was a test case, and this is the name of the test case, and this test case failed in Test Center. And it also provides me a backlink, so I can click on this to get right to the result that failed in Test Center. So this gives us traceability in both directions, so we can jump to the Jira issue and we can also jump back. Of course, for other integrations like Polarian or Zephyr and X-Ray, they do support result types, so the pushing of results works even better for those integrations. Now let's maybe go back to the traceability view one more time. It is of course a little bit cumbersome to always have to use these two buttons. So what you can also do is we provide a command line utility called Test Center Command, and you can automate all traceability actions using this command line utility and use it to integrate it into your CI system. So whenever you push results from your CI system to Test Center, you can also trigger the pushing and pulling so that the results get synchronized with the third-party system. Another thing that you can do in this view is you can actually export requirements traceability matrix. So let's say you store all your requirements in Jira, then you can basically populate this view and get an overview of the coverage of your requirements, the test coverage of your requirements. And you can export this using this button up here and get a requirements traceability matrix, which is sometimes required in some processes. And maybe one more word regarding Jenkins. So if you're already using the Squish Jenkins plugin, that can already be configured to upload results to Test Center. But yeah, in all other cases, you can integrate with almost every CI system using our Test Center command utility to upload results to Test Center. Okay, so this concludes the demo. We analyzed and compared our automated test results, updated a visual verification point. We looked at our test results over time using the timeline, stats, and graph view. We analyzed our current code coverage, created, executed, and assigned manual tests in Test Center, and we transferred some test results over to our Jira instance and established traceability. As you can see, Test Center is a very powerful tool when it comes to test analysis and test management, supporting a vast amount of third-party tools to integrate with, and covers the complete workflow of a modern QA team, from manual testing over automated tests and code coverage analysis to state-of-the-art traceability features.